how to work with the board. The board has very different priorities than the CEO. The board, their number one priority is risk mitigation to protect their own reputations. Number two is their legal and fiduciary responsibilities. And three is the business performance. For a CEO, the number one is business performance. And then number two and number three are risk management and fiduciary responsibility. Very different in terms of that mismatch. And so when I work with founders, I have to get them to realize that you can be fired faster for lack of transparency than you can for lack of performance. If you aren't transparent, you could be gone in 2 days. If you're performing badly, you'll probably get a year or 18 months. And that surprises a lot of my clients. But I categorically believe it's true.
You've had death threats, a bulletproof car. Your wife was trained what to do if shot. Walk us into that room. What was the business decision that put a target on you?
So this was a time when I was the CEO of KFC in Southern Africa. And it was a great big business, I think about $500 million in revenue. So a big size business, lots of complexity in Southern Africa. And this is in the early 2000s. Crime is still rife in that country, but crime was definitely the case then. So I had a bulletproof car, which I loved. It went like a rocket. Had about 200 kilograms of Kevlar in the doors, and the windows were about 2 inches thick, etc. And so when we arrived in the country, we had a couple of days of security training. And part of that was learning how to drive and escape a carjacking, so a defensive driving course. We're also taught how to extract kids in a hijacking or carjacking. My wife was trained how to be shot by handgun and live. And for those listeners, put your hands up in front of your vital parts is a critical part, because 99% of robberies are done with a handgun. And then one day I was disenfranchising a franchisee, and he walks in and pulls a gun out of his pocket, puts it on the table and just taps the gun saying, "So how are your kids enjoying South Africa? You've got 3, don't you? Sophie, Emily and Paige, and they're at Dane School. Do you feel safe?" Do they feel safe? And obviously my heart rate went up to about 200, but I still disenfranchised him. But that was a life experience for sure.
When your physical safety is at risk, what does that do to your decision-making as a CEO? Did the fear make you more disciplined or less?
Really good question. I suppose when I reflect back now, I'm a lot calmer about it now. So I talk a lot about resilience, grit and resilience. Grit is being proactive and knowing you can work through things. And it's almost like a verb, it's doing things. Where resilience is accumulated based on experiences. And this was obviously, not obviously, but this was the first time I'd ever received a threat to myself and my family. So that had an impact. But I was also calm enough to know that it was unlikely and that I needed to continue to go down the path. Now, the second he left the room, I then arranged security to look after my family and myself for a period of time. And then we just moved on with life. But over time, I've received a few death threats in my life. And you never can be blasé about it. And I'm not being trivial about it now. But it's that resilience piece. You go forward and you go, actually, it's quite unlikely that something would happen here. And you know that I know that I can get through things.
And what have you done to develop that resilience? I know in like special forces, for example, they use box breathing to calm down the nervous system. Is there any sort of like visualization or exercises you can walk us through to kind of ground or center ourselves in times of stress?
Yeah. So I read a great book. It's probably 30 years old now. It's by Adam Fraser. It's called The Third Space. And he talks about the gap between one event and another event and how do you reset in that time. So a good example is Rafa Nadal, the tennis player. I remember how he used to have a routine where he'd do his shoulders, his nose, his underpants. And I've never spoken to Rafa, but that was his way of resetting between points. So when I'm coaching and mentoring leaders and on my own personal journey, I worked out how to reset. And so for me, resetting first up was going to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. That exercise was absolutely critical for me and still is. So I had a call last night at midnight to 1 a.m. I went to bed at about 1:15, and then I was up at 5 a.m. and went to the gym. And that's just a routine that I've got into all my life. And that's what you need to get into, this routine of what are the steps that you can take that help you reset. It might be exercise, it might be box breathing, it might be meditation a couple of times a day. It might be actually just closing your door at lunchtime and or switching off from Zoom for 10 minutes and having a sandwich and watching something on YouTube, watching the football. So everyone is different and they need to work out what their reset trigger is. And for me, it was exercise and also maybe walking out of the office and walking around the block and do something like that, just clearing my head.
Yeah, it seems like putting in the ingredients for success later and finding that balance. And speaking of balance, I'd like to talk about the relationship between vision and discipline. Storytelling has come up a lot recently in my conversations, and I see storytelling as something that can be used for good and can be used for evil. And it depends, I think, on how it's backed up. Is it backed up with evidence or is it just vapid? And when it comes to vision, I would like to understand where you land because, as I understand, you had a costly lesson in that department. Could you speak a little bit about vision and discipline and your evolved thinking about the topic?
So first, in terms of the costly lesson, and I see this a lot of times with a lot of people I work with, but it happened to me too. Um, Firstly, to be a CEO, you've got to be an optimist. And actually, I talk about in my book, The Optimism Trap, where actually you can trip yourself up. But you, as a founder, as a CEO, you've got to be an optimist. But that can actually really trip you up, particularly when you're expanding internationally. And I've had a lot of experiences where I've expanded my business or the business I was in internationally and failed miserably. A good example is Taco Bell. Your listeners would know Taco Bell extremely well, an amazing brand in the US, and it's one of my favorites. I was responsible for launching it in Australia, and I thought it was a slam dunk. Of course, Australians are going to love Taco Bell. Well, we got it up to 15 stores, and then we lost about $30 million, and then we closed them. And that was just my optimism that it would work. And that's not the case. Same thing with a lot of founders across Asia. They are successful in Singapore, and then they think, okay, let's go to Indonesia. Let's go to Malaysia. Let's go to the Philippines. It's not that easy. And so you've got to be careful about your vision and your optimism, maybe creating blind spots in really how challenging it is in those markets.
Yeah, there's a big difference with culture. It's kind of like infrared vision or something with vapor that you don't know until you live in it long enough that you start to see different layers. Were you by any chance involved with Taco Bell in the 90s, like early 90s?
Yeah.
Did you see
Yeah.
the movie Demolition Man with Sylvester Stallone and Wesley
Yeah.
Snipes? You know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious. That product placement, I thought that was brilliant. And also
Absolutely.
just the reversal of like how we categorize things. Something is cheap and like fast food, or something becomes premium because they won the franchise wars of whatever year they were in, and so it was the fine dining. I thought that was kind of tongue in cheek.
See,
And also,
and
speaking of franchises and storytelling, are you familiar with KFC's story in Japan?
in Japan or China?
Well, I'm not familiar with China. I'd love to hear your take on that. In Japan, as I understand it, they were looking at how to break into the market. So they worked with the local marketing department, and they knew what stories would stick, what would resonate. And I don't know if you'd call it manufactured or enhanced this narrative that there is no such thing as Christmas without KFC. And all Westerners who love each other eat KFC at Christmas. And so basically, like, it got pretty extreme. The marketing was brilliant, depending on how you look at it, I suppose. But basically, people would break up, couples would break up if their significant other did not buy them KFC on Christmas, because it's actually a symbol of you don't care about the person. And it became so popular that KFC was sold out. And so it's almost like overflow. So the the convenience stores were also offering this fried chicken service for Christmas. And it took off like wildfire. And that's, it's fried chicken, same fried chicken everywhere, but the story element of it really made it stick. Whereas other, ventures sometimes don't quite connect that and maybe miss a few details, and they have to tuck tail and go back. What was the situation with China?
So actually, now that you do mention it, I was wondering what story you're going to tell with Japan. So I went to Japan, I don't know, probably 15 times, meeting the KFC. It was a joint venture between Yum Brands and Mitsubishi. And so I went there quite a few times. And really, it's a big business, about 3,000 or 4,000 stores, and a big business, and listed as well. China was an amazing story. So China, gosh, back in the late 90s, they were losing money hand over fist, but they kept building. And Sam Su was the CEO at the time, and he did a phenomenal job. So I think, we lost a few $100 million in 1998. We broke even in 2000, and then we made a couple of $100 million in 2002, and it's never looked back. It's now separately listed on the China stock market, and it's the best and biggest business for KFC anywhere in the world, and it eclipses McDonald's. So KFC beats McDonald's in quite a few markets around the world, but McDonald's is often the biggest. But in China, it blows everyone away. And the reason they do that, and I worked with a lot of my clients on this, is you need to understand the market. So Chinese, when they eat, they want variety. So if you go to a KFC in the US, maybe you'll get a burger, maybe you get some fried chicken and some chips and a drink. That's about it. You go to China and there'll be 8 different things on the dish, and it'll be the chicken, maybe it's a little burger, maybe a few chips, some rice, some salad. Maybe they've got a little custard tart or something, a tea, and then also another beverage. So that's the way a lot of them eat in China. And KFC was actually very different in the way they position the menu in China. So when I talk to leaders as they're expanding overseas, you've got to invest the time to really understand the differences in the market, because there are massive differences in the way people eat, drink, dress, etc.
Definitely. Continuing with vision, we often mythologize leaders, for better or worse. And in business, some of the titans might be Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos, a few others, no doubt. What's the disciplined behavior in each of them that goes unnoticed from your lens?
Question. I wish I could provide more insight there and have been around and seen Steve Jobs or working with Elon Musk and those people. But I mean, from what I've read, Steve Jobs was just maniacal about the product, just maniacal about the quality of the product, and was into the immense detail. And great leaders are fantastic at going from 10,000 feet into the mud, 10,000 feet into the mud, and that's a superpower. And not everyone can do it. Yet Steve Jobs was able to do that. He was able to look and get into the detail and actually play a role in the detail, but then also pop up to 10,000 feet. Same thing with Elon Musk. I mean, with what he's done in his businesses, he's definitely the entrepreneur of our generation in terms of what he's done. And he's got there by having a phenomenal vision, but then he's also actually looked really deeply into and gone deeply into the detail. There's stories about him sleeping in the factory, etc. And I don't know how true that was, but he really went deeply into the detail to understand what's going on. And the way I would also paraphrase that is great leaders need to get close to front line. And the front line could be your factory workers. It could be your, maybe it's your service personnel that are on the same site with the customers. Get close to the front line to really understand what's happening.
In addition to, thank you for sharing that. That's interesting, going from the 10,000 foot view into the detail. That made me think of also with feedback, when you mentioned getting on the front line, sometimes there's this distortion field around the CEO or the leader. And I heard sometimes, like Wozniak called it the reality distortion field around Steve Jobs. When you elicit feedback, sometimes people can tell you what they think you want to hear. And it might be somewhat diluted. Do you have kind of a heuristic for taking group consensus and individual feedback or anything to kind of optimize the accuracy of what you're hearing?
Yeah. So, David, I came up with an approach quite a few years ago, which I now give out to my clients. But an example would be, so David, say you're the CEO or senior leader in a business. You've got your leadership team meeting. What you then do in that meeting is you say, hey, I'm going to step out, and Janice, I'd like you to facilitate a conversation about me with the team, with me out of the room. So you go out of the room and Janice talks to the leadership team and asks 3 questions. So what's David doing well? What do we appreciate about David's leadership? What's he doing better now than he was doing, say, 6 months ago? What are the areas of opportunity that David could grow as a leader? Although I said 3, there's a 4th one. The 4th one is, what would we do differently if we were in David's shoes? And so those 4 questions, then she aggregates that responsibility, that feedback, sits down with you and gives you really clear, confidential feedback that you would otherwise not get. So that's a wonderful way for a CEO to get feedback. And you can do the written 360s and etc. But I find this is a great way because that leader, Janice, can actually facilitate the discussion and get more detail and depth to give back to you, David, as the leader.
Yeah, that's great advice. Also, you mentioned resilience and how you develop resilience. When it comes to stories about leaders, sometimes they can be pretty effusive and pretty harsh, sometimes in equal measure. Do you have a tactic or a learned strategy that you've developed that helps you navigate the middle road and not get too high on your own supply when you're getting feedback that favors you, and understanding or getting to the root of helpful criticism in feedback that is maybe more critical?
Yeah, so I think firstly, the first time any of us get 360 feedback, there's always a few spears that have been thrown over the fence. Always. And you go, no, that can't be true. Or you go, I know who said that. David said that because I had an argument with David yesterday. So that's generally the first way you accept 360 feedback. Over time, hopefully, you actually become more open and interested in going, it doesn't matter who said it. I know I need to be better as a leader. So I talk about the concept of being a relentless student. And so we talk, you've probably heard the phrase avid learner. A relentless student is a notch up. And that's, as a leader, you've got to be this relentless student, continuing to learn and grow. Otherwise, the business is going to scale and you won't. So to get there, you need to get feedback from appropriate people. You need to have a mentor or a coach. You need to have a support network, and might be your life partner that's also honest with you. And always be very careful about overly positive feedback. And maybe I'll add a phrase that one of my mentors said to me a long time ago. He said, Dane, when the business is 10% up, run it like it's 20% down, because you never know when it's going to turn around. And a good example of that is AI. Wow, how much is that changing the landscape? And if you're not on top of that, you better get on top of that because it's going to impact the business.
Right. Could you touch on or unpack rather for us, the optimism trap, where the same belief that launched a company becomes the thing that derails it, and how a founder can detect that when they're in the middle of the trap?
Yeah. So the optimism trap is, I suppose, that the vision, and that I can get to the vision. And that drives the founder every day, that inspires people to come to work with a founder, that inspires financiers to give money to the founder to invest. So that's fantastic. So you need that optimism. But the trap is when you actually don't, when you look at everything through rose-colored glasses. And it's easy to do, particularly when you're an optimistic person. So to actually get through that, there's a couple of things you need to do. So one is each week, so maybe on a Friday at the end of the week, go, okay, and be deliberately reflective and go, this week, where was I too optimistic? Was I too optimistic with a customer tender? Was I too optimistic with one of my team members? Where could I have been more pragmatic? So that's one thing you can do. Secondly, what you can do is you can actually assign a contrarian voice on your team. Maybe it's your leadership team, one of the co-founders, and you say, hey, Richard, can you be the contrarian voice for the meetings this week? It's a tough role to have, so you want me to mix it up. So Richard can't be in that role all the time, but you need someone on the team that's going to be deliberate in being a little bit contrarian and pushes back. And then the final element is have a mentor and a coach who you can talk to. And they might say, hey, Dane, I just think you're being too optimistic here. So you probably need more of a mentor and advisor than a coach. A coach isn't meant to give you advice. I'm more of a mentor and an advisor, and I'm quite happy to actually step in and say, hey, David, I've seen this before. I think you're being a little bit too optimistic.
Pardon me, I was swallowing funny. So you defined disciplined leadership through specific behaviors. Could you give me 2 or 3 that would provide the most leverage for a founder of, say, a 100 employee company?
Yeah. So first, I've come up with this description where a disciplined leader is someone that's self-aware. So they're very aware of their leadership shadow. So your leadership shadow is your positional power. We all have it. So those of us that are parents know that our kids copy us all the time. I'm not saying your team are kids, but your team will copy you all the time. So firstly, you've got to be very self-aware, and you've got to role model the behaviors that you want your team to do. Thirdly, you've got to operate in line with the company values. And finally, you're going to be this relentless student, constantly learning. So I suppose that's the package of being a disciplined leader. In terms of areas where I see founders and CEOs maybe not showing the intensity that they need to show is one, in terms of building trust with the team, and because trust is the foundation for accountability. So there are certain things you can do to build trust in the business, and that's a good example. One is role modeling. 2 is connecting with people. A simple one there, David, is just using people's names. When you walk into a room, do you say hello, David? Hello, Albert? Hello, Janice, etc.? Do you use people's names? Do you know a little bit about your team? And you're not necessarily looking for new best friends, but you've got to connect with your team to create that level of trust. And then there's a number of other things you need to do. Once you've got some trust, you can then move on to building an accountable culture. And this is where disciplined leaders really need to invest their time. If you want your business to achieve the vision, you've got to be disciplined in terms of setting the targets, follow up, making the targets visible, making the performance visible. And the last one is there's got to be consequences when people actually don't hit their targets. And the consequences could be good things like a high five or a bonus or well done. The consequences could be, I'm disappointed with your performance, David. This is a formal warning, David. Don't come Monday, David. So that discipline in terms of creating a culture of accountability is absolutely critical, particularly as they get over 100 people.
You mentioned a few of the things that people can do to start to build trust. Is there a way that you can measure? Is that through like the Janice exercise that you mentioned earlier? Or how do you know that you've built enough trust to start to implement some of these practices you mentioned?
So in my book, if I can quote that, there is a questionnaire that people can complete that actually looks at building trust. And the way, let me just explain that briefly. So there are 10 criteria. So for example, does everyone speak up honestly in the meetings? Does everyone speak up honestly outside of meetings? Do people actually raise issues with the CEO? Do they resolve them themselves? Is there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And what you can do is send that out to the team and ask the team to give a score out of 5, where 5 is high and 1 is terrible. And then get that feedback in confidentially and then create a frequency distribution. And I've done this for a lot of my clients, and I've done it in my own career as well. And you bring that in and you've got a frequency distribution, and then you use that not to find out who gave you a 1 or 2, but it's like, we've got a number of 2s here. Team, what do we do differently? And so I've got one client that's done this survey every 6 months for the last 5 years, just continuing to measure and evaluate the level of trust in the business. So that's a mechanical way of doing it. A more obvious way of doing it is looking at your staff turnover. If your staff turnover is high, there's a good chance that the level of trust in the business isn't going to be there.
Are there any like red herrings or false kind of indicators that people sometimes misread when determining how well their team is doing?
Good question. Okay. So there's a quote that I use, and I think I picked it up when I was doing my MBA a few decades ago at Columbia. And it's oblige luck, it's a quote, oblige luck by examining the sources. So an example would be
Like that.
when we lose a tender or something goes wrong, we do an autopsy. We dive in, we analyze it, and we go, well, what could we have done differently? When we win something, we just pat ourselves on the back. And it could have been luck. It could have been luck. So I encourage people that, yes, do the autopsy when things go wrong, but similarly, when things go well, Could mean luck. Do an autopsy as well. Understand whether actually there were things you did that led to the success, or was it just luck?
Mm.
And that's the element where sometimes people get too confident and go, well, we're doing fabulously well, but actually it's just like timing of the market, timing of market. Commodities are a great example. The mining companies do fabulously well when commodity prices are high, and do less well when the commodity prices are low, and they can't control the commodity prices.
You mentioned you've mentored quite a few CEOs, over 100. Is there a common thing they're doing first thing Monday that they should not be doing?
Uh, Well, I think firstly, a lot of leaders we do get stuck in the detail of email and Slack and WhatsApp and
Right.
responding to messages, etc. So that's number one. Is you what I would do in my time, I'd come from the gym. I'd be in the office by 7:15, and then I'd have from 7:15 to 8 to clear my emails and get things out of the way so I can be present all day. So number one, the leader has to be present. So there's a great quote: "Be here now." The
Mm.
leader has to be present. When anyone comes in as CEO, to see the CEO, it's career day, and you've got to give them the attention that they deserve. So that would be number one in terms of what leaders should do, is clean the deck and then be focused on people coming in. Where of my 150 CEO clients, the number one topic I talk to them about is how to work with their board. That's the number one issue that almost all my clients have: how to work with the board. And it could be a board of two people from two venture capital firms that invested, or it could be a listed company board with a lot of 50 and 60-year-old people that have been CEOs. So most people struggle with boards.
What is the common struggle with leaders working with boards? Could you speak to that?
Sure. I might get some nasty grams on email by telling you this, but it's the truth. The board has very different priorities than the CEO. The board, their number one priority is risk mitigation to protect their own reputations.
Mm.
That's number one for them. Number two is their legal and fiduciary responsibilities. And three is the business performance. For a CEO, the number one is business performance. And
Right.
then number two and number three are risk management and fiduciary responsibility. So
Hmm.
very different in terms of that that mismatch. And so when I work with founders, I have to get them to realize that you can be fired faster for lack of transparency than you can for lack of performance. If you aren't
Mm.
transparent, you could be gone in 2 days. If you're performing badly, you'll probably get a year or 18 months. And that surprises a lot of my clients. But I categorically believe it's true.
When you look at Zuckerberg and I believe Musk and maybe a few others, they've designed their business in such a way that it makes it harder for them to be fired by the board. When we look back at that kind of fear, making the jump without the safety rope, do you think there's an advantage or disadvantage to either approach, having a CEO that has to listen to the board versus a CEO that is a little bit protected?
Look, I putting on my statutory hat or my compliance hat, the CEO and the chair and the CEO, which is often the case in the US, the board should be able to fire them. I mean, that's the ultimate protection for the shareholders. So the board should be able to do that. So I don't necessarily agree. I agree with what these people have done, but holy heck, they've done amazingly well. They've
Hmm.
done amazingly well by their investors, so it's hard to be too critical. But I do think from a standpoint of conflict of interest and etc.,
Hmm.
the founders, the CEOs should be able to be fired by their board.
It makes a
And
lot of sense. Please.
yeah, and then secondly, with a lot of the founders, I work a lot in the venture capital space and private equity space with founders and CEOs, and they say to me, "Dane, I can't be fired. I'm a 60% shareholder." And I go, "Actually, you can be fired. You can be fired. So don't ever think you can't be fired." And also, yes, you might be a 50 or 60% shareholder, but you've got funds coming in that are giving you money, and they've actually got more power than you've given them a lot of power. So don't think that you're immune to being untransparent,
Hmm.
non-compliant, and having bad performance.
It's again a balance, I think, to strive toward. It's difficult to know what you don't know, and other perspectives can provide some wisdom, perhaps some ideas, and some counters to what you might do unbridled. And then you do look at some of the successes that people with a little bit more, let's say, agency or autonomy, lack of consequence might achieve. And you might wonder, is that luck? Should everyone be doing that? When we look at AI, for example, some people say just go as big as you can, as quick as you can. And other people are a little bit more concerned about the ethics of it, slow rollout, governance, etc. This sort of accountability and kind of following vision seems to come up in many spaces in business. I'm wondering what your thoughts are with AI as it enters leadership and governance.
So firstly, I think leadership is as important now, if not more important now, as it was prior to AI. So there's certain things that AI cannot do. It cannot build relationships with your team, cannot build relationships with customers. It cannot. Well, those are probably two of the biggest things that AI can't do. And businesses will still be run by people and leaders and their teams. So as a leader, you've got to inspire, you've got to recruit people, you've got to inspire them, you've got to develop them. AI can't do that. So I do think that leadership is still critically important. With that said, AI is changing the playing field. So previously, successful companies might take 2 or 3 or 4 years to grow to 5, 10, $20 million. Now with AI, that's been massively reduced. I think there was a study by Deloitte, and it spoke about companies getting from 0 to 10 million revenue on average has reduced from 39 months to 31 months. So the impact of that shortening of the curve is that if you're a leader, you've got to grow even faster. So AI is changing business dynamics, but a critical part of it is it's speeding the growth of the company, which means the leader has to accelerate their growth. And it goes back to one of my earlier comments about being a relentless student. You've got to learn to grow, and you've got to grow at pace. And if you're not, then your team or your board or someone's got to say to you, "Hey, Dane, it's time for you to step aside. You're not growing at the pace that this business requires."
You've run businesses across Sydney, Shanghai, Johannesburg, and New York. What does discipline look like across cultures? Where is it different, and what stays consistent?
Okay. So I've actually moved country 11 times in my career. So I moved country 11 times, moved house 29 times, but the same wife for 38 years. So that's pretty good. So I've lived on all the continents and had a wonderful, wonderful time. So it is very different. So the US culture, and I lived in the US for I think 8 or 9 years. The US corporate culture is very different. It's very direct. You can speak directly to people. You can point them in a direction, and everyone will salute the flag and go in a clear direction. In other countries, that's not necessarily the case. We were talking about Japan earlier. I'm sure you've heard the comment about the Japan nodding. Yes, they're not yet nodding that they agree with you. They're nodding that they heard you.
Right.
And that's it. And then India as well, just the hierarchical nature there. I might say, and I've been to India about 60 times. I might say, hey, we should think about doing this. And I go leave the country and I come back 2 months later and I meet the team. And they say, hey, Dane, we implemented that. And I went, I didn't tell you to do that. And they said, yes, you did. So their exaggeration of what I said, their hearing exaggerates it. So one of the things I've learned in my career is every culture is very different, and you need to be very thoughtful about how you interact with those people in that company, in that country, within that culture, because it's very, very different. And the final element of that, David, is you need a local leader. You need a local leader. You might have as in country local leader. You might have your head of strategy from the headquarters in the US that also works there, or your CFO from US also works there, but you need a local country manager because they're going to be able to read the business better, the market better, connect with the team better. But the risk is there's compliance issues. I've fired a lot of CEOs local managers around the world for compliance issues. And that's the risk. Things go wrong all the time internationally.
That balance between having a global culture versus local sensitivity and finding that kind of fluid moving target dynamic depending on different factors is it seems to escape us. There's brilliant books constantly coming out, but I don't think they're ever going to run out of material.
No, there's not. I dedicate a whole chapter to how to run international businesses. And the first element is recruiting the right person.
Well, let's double click on that for a moment, shall we? Understanding who the right person is almost like investing because you don't know who they are yet. You can look at references, you can look at CVs, you can maybe look at brands as proxy. How do you go about efficiently hiring top talent?
Okay. So firstly, use a search company. They have great inroads. They've got great networks. They've got great reference checking, etc. So for a big leader, I'd always use a search company, and I'd also use my network to understand who else might be out there. Then you've got to meet the person at least 3 times, maybe 4 times. So the first time might be this: we just have a general chat, David. The second time we meet face to face in the office, and we spend a few hours together. The third time might be actually you coming in and we do some problem solving about an issue. The fourth time, I take you out to dinner with my wife.
Could we do that the first time?
Fourth time.
No, I'm just joking. I said, could we do that the first time?
Yeah, because they're more, my wife, we did this with a potential CEO in China, and she came along. I was running the business in China, and she came along to help me interview, have the dinner.
Okay.
And I said to her, what do you think of George? And she said, amazing. He's perfect, but he's not going to take the job. And she was right. He played us to get a better salary from his current employer.
Interesting.
And so the thing is, the reason I want those 4 things, and I want them in different situations, could be coffee shops, it could be meetings, it could be dinner, is you want to see people in different circumstances to see, how they respond. Right. And that's number 1. Number 2 is dive deep into their resume. Early on in the 90s or probably 2000s, everyone claimed credit. Everyone in tech or who worked for Apple claimed credit for the iPhone. Everyone. It was on everyone's CV. Anyone who worked for Apple said they created the iPhone. And that's obviously not possible. So you've got to dive deep into their CVs. And the other element there is, have they been internally promoted? If the only way they've been promoted is leaving the company, then something's wrong. So those things are a good start.
That makes a lot of sense, what you said, but it's interesting, that last part, because I guess in the teens, that seemed to be kind of, at least in tech, the way that you got ahead. You could go from like an individual contributor up to like a product manager in under 3 years with like a 5x increase in salary or more by jumping ship strategically somewhere in the 3 to 6 month mark and just hopping your way up the logo ladder. But as you're saying, looking at the substance of someone's, and perhaps you're talking here about leaders as well, the deeper character, that's interesting to hear. So what would you say then to people that have done that? Because it seemed to be kind of in vogue for a good decade in tech, at least.
Yeah, and I can understand that there was a war for talent, and people could get big increases. And I think everyone knows that the best way to get a big increase is change jobs. Rarely do you get a big salary increase by staying in the company and getting promoted. So you need to leave companies. So I get that. It's just one of the, I suppose, ways I evaluate talent is, are they getting internally promoted? And it's very hard to do if they're jumping ship all the time. And also it makes me worried about whether they're going to jump ship when they join me. They're just going to move to something else.
It's a useful data point. Yeah. If you have a need that's going to last 3 months and you're good either way, then maybe it makes sense to take the risk. Also, there's something to be said about making a good case for yourself internally and giving it a go there. Maybe it's not quite the same promotion you would get by going external, but there's other benefits too. So yeah, it's not quite as cut and dry as good versus bad, but yeah, that's really interesting. You've led companies with 200,000 employees. What is that like? Like, I imagine it in some ways is similar to leading a company of 100 employees in phases. You talk to 100 people who talk to 100 people and so on. But from your shoulders, like responsibility wise, from your mental space, can you speak about what the difference is being the leader of a city, basically.
Well, yeah, it's a privilege. So firstly, you've got to recognize it is an amazing privilege. Secondly, I had to get up every morning and think, I want to make a difference to all of these employees. I want to make a difference to them. So how do I make a difference? So that's one of my, not research, but one of the challenges I would do all the time is how do I have an impact on all these people? And my impact on people was actually through the CEOs, because I was actually leading very large CEOs. They were multi-billion dollar companies in these countries that they were running. So I need to ensure that I had a relationship with them and that they were doing the things that I would want them to do in terms of
Mm,
creating a great culture. And so I would also visit each of these countries just about every month. And as we were saying before, I'd get into the business. I would spend time going out to the customers, to the front line, and talking to people there. I would arrange to have a lunch with 10 or 15 people, and it would be people with varying levels in the organization. And I talk about the strategy. I would give them a little bit of the background on me. I would ask them what's working well in their business today, what's not working, and what they would do if they were me. And so this might be 15 people in India, could be 15 people in China, it could be, and all levels of the organization. And you get some great feedback. And that's a wonderful way to find out what's happening in the business. And that gets around. They tell people, hey, I met Dane. He's a decent sort of guy. The problem with doing this is you get things to do. Is that they say, this isn't working, that's not
mm,
working. And so you walk away from that and you've actually got a to-do list. But that's a wonderful way to find out what's really happening in a business as well.
mhm. I've found prioritizing is a skill in itself too. When you get new data points, you want to clear last week's to-do list, and then you get a new item for this week, and it's like, well, does it go at the bottom, the middle, or the top of the existing action list? I do want to point to your book. Wiley Publishing is an excellent publishing company. It speaks to the pedigree or the caliber of the wisdom that you're sharing with us, and discipline beats vision, how to be the leader your company needs. You mentioned the assessment in the book. Is there one chapter or even one quote that really speaks to you as far as what this book represents for leaders and companies?
Wow, that's a good one. So, David, I think that the key thing is that your life journey is your leadership journey. And so what I
Mm,
mean by that is that,
yeah.
as we grow, as a children go to school, grow, we learn and develop. Don't ever stop doing that. And this relentless student piece again, which I'll mention for the fourth time. But my book is very much a handbook. So there's an initial evaluation in chapter 1 of yourself as a leader, and then that points you to different chapters. So I don't expect it to be a linear read. Someone might read it and go, I've got an issue with building culture, so I'm going to go to that chapter. I've got an issue with my board, I'm going to go to that chapter. And in each chapter, there's founder stories with a starting Monday challenge to you. So what are you going to do differently as a leader starting Monday? And so it's not a book that I want to sit on a shelf. It's a book that I want people to scribble notes in and then do something different as a leader on Monday.
Do you continue to change your Monday routine even now?
Yeah. So, I was a corporate CEO. Now I've become a CEO mentor. I also teach at universities. And now, as of 3 or 4 months ago, I'm an author. So I do keep reinventing myself. And I'm also now doing keynote speeches. So I do continue to reinvent myself. And I love that. I love change. As you can tell by the fact we've moved countries so many times.
Yeah.
I love change, and I love continuing to learn.
Incredible. Well, we covered a lot of ground. It was a pleasure. Is there anything that you want to leave us with that we didn't get a chance to touch on regarding leadership, the journey, or your book?
So, look, my company is Impactful Leadership. Go to my website, www.impactfulleadership.com. You can see what I do in terms of mentoring, training, keynote speaking. My book, it's doing really well, which I'm really pleased about. And you can get it in, I'm not sure how many bookstores across the US, but definitely on Amazon, Booktopia, Goodreads. Yeah, it's getting great feedback. I don't make much money of those people that are authors. It's about just sharing the wisdom. So
Mm.
I hope people enjoy the read and then do something differently on Monday. But I've enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me on, Dave.
Thank you, Dane.